My name is Rosemary Rivera. Natural Justice is the citizen action affiliate in Rochester, so if any of you know Colin O'Malley, I'm Colin on the statewide level, so that to give you some relationship. So actually, we have not had funding for Rochester organizing of AQE for a long time. So I've been going around I supervised from Buffalo, New York to Hudson Valley region. And we were doing some pretty amazing work, particularly in Buffalo, where we recently passed the most progressive code of conduct in the country with the help of a civil rights group out of Washington, D.C. named the Advancement Project. And we, of course, our bread and butter issues in terms of education has always been education finance reform, particularly the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, which some of you around this table fought very hard for. For 13 years, we fought that battle both in the courts, and it was a dual strategy, both in the court system as a landmark lawsuit that came into New York State. And in 2007, we won $7 billion for public education. Woohoo! It was a beautiful thing to have won that money, and in the year following that, we started to see some real improvements. The 1 or 2 years following that, and then guess what happened? Boom! The recession happened. And then there was no money. And then everything went downhill, and then Cuomo came in and put tax caps, and then it just became horrific, and now we're at pre-2007 levels in terms of funding for education and a commitment from the state legislature to education. So the fact is, it's really ironic because I think it was today there was a Wall Street Journal article, how many of you read that one, about there is a new lawsuit by charter schools.
Oh, there was something in
Yes,
today's paper.
in today's paper.
In today's Democrat.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw that.
Isn't that ridiculous? So I saw this yesterday. The Wall Street Journal broke the story yesterday.
Yeah, their buildings and all kinds of...
public education forever.
So we who have been fighting for public education forever and know that part of the problem is education finance reform, the fact that the funding is not equitable throughout the state, and the funding formulas. When I first started, there were these funding formulas, and there was a running joke in the state senate that only 3 people actually understood the funding formula to begin with, and it was literally people were calling legislators at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, will you give me this and I'll give you more funding for education, because who can fight when it comes to kids? So everybody loves kids and everybody knows they're our future. So that's how the funding formula worked, which means that it really didn't work, because it didn't work for many. And there were really huge disparities throughout the state of New York. So when the Campaign for Fiscal Equity has been and will continue to be our main focus until we get the funding that is necessary for all kids to succeed. Now, once you get that funding, it's how are they going to use that funding? That is incredibly important too. Now, there's waste at every company. I don't care if you're Xerox or, Kodak or whatever. There's a waste at every company.
Kodak's a champion.
So yes, schools have their waste too, but the amount of waste that you're talking about versus the things that our students actually need is incredible. I happen to come from Ferguson. Eleanor came to a presentation I did 2 nights. When was that? Was that 2 nights ago?
I can't even remember.
Was that last night? It was last night. Oh my God, things are like running slow. So last night I did a presentation about what I witnessed in Ferguson, Missouri, where Mike Brown was killed. And I happened to, I'm sure many of you read the book with Jonathan Kozol, Savage Inequalities. A lot of that book was based in East Missouri and some of the things there. And I was able to talk to a lot of students and a lot of the folks on the ground there. And it is really incredible. A lot of people based the fact that Ferguson even happened, in terms of education. You know, even when I was on the plane going, we need better education. I got down there, we need better education. I talked to the parents, we need better education. Education, so number one, I have to applaud you because you're all looking at the right issue. And there's really, it is part of the fabric of what we're either going to do well in or not. So back to the campaign for fiscal equity, and if anyone's interested, I've still got my pictures from yesterday in the car from Ferguson, if anybody wants to see those.
I was going to come to your presentation and I couldn't make it, so I'm sorry. I missed
No,
it.
that's fine. As a product, if you were a business person, as a product, you know, if I were going to sell public education to somebody, I'd be like, I don't know about that, right? Because you hear about the graduation rates, the first thing that you hear is, you know, the kids are hanging off of the ceiling, the kids are, you know, out of control, so on and so forth. And I believe that one of the things that people want, and I've heard it around this table already, is for their children to be safe and in an environment that is conducive to learning. So, to teaching and learning. I think we all agree that that is really important in the school to have that kind of a climate. But what we discovered in Buffalo at the time when I was supervising this campaign, one of the youth head was shot and killed as he was suspended wandering the halls. He was told to go out to the bus stop, and he was shot and killed at the school. He was suspended for walking the halls. I mean, it just kind of breaks my heart. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't, you know, doing any of these things. He was kind of walking the halls, and he didn't want to go to class right then, and instead they put him out. I always say I'd rather have my kid in a closet before in school and in safe before you send him out to the streets, because, you know, either you're going to be learning something in the school or you're going to be learning from somebody out here. And that's the reality for many of our parents in our neighborhoods. So we decided to come together and we passed this code of conduct, and we realized in Buffalo they were suspending one student every 3 minutes of a school year. And they were predominantly African American and Hispanic students, of course. So they worked really hard. They changed the code of conduct, and now they have some pilot programs in terms of restorative practices. They've put some money into it, and the parents have had pitchforks over at the Board of Education if they tried to stop that, because the parents really got involved in this. They really want to see safe and good schools. And they don't want to see their kids being pushed out of school, because it's the beginning of what they consider the pipeline to prison, which many of you already know. So after doing all of this work in Buffalo, seeing it in Syracuse, which is another long story, Binghamton, and in other areas, I said, wow, I live in Rochester and I haven't been doing much of anything where I live, and my grandchildren are African American, and I want to do something. So on a volunteer basis, I am right now a volunteer. I put together a group out of Metro Justice called the Alliance for AQE Metro Justice Committee. And we've had, it started in January. We did some bus trips. Lori came on one of our bus trips. We had a bus full and a van full and all kinds of stuff to go to Albany. So I was able to fundraise some money to take us to Albany to participate in some of the lobbying days there around education funding and other things. And then right now, what we've decided to focus on is both the funding piece, which is kind of the bread and butter, because I'm also hoping that this will allow me to kind of seek more funding so that we can get a full-time organizer on the ground. It's very, you all know, this is really hard work, and recruitment and retainment in the movement, and to build this. You need somebody who's doing this almost full-time, all the time. And that's hard to do because people have lives. So my mission is to find funding so that we can hire somebody from the community that would do this work. But at this point, what we've done is we've had a couple of successes already. We entered into a memorandum of understanding with the district, and we have James Bearden, who's was a professor out of Geneseo. He's been working with me for, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years on this kind of stuff. And I have a young man who went to MIT who's like a real policy wonk. So he's a data expert and analyst. And so together, along with, I was able to bring the advancement project kind of into Rochester, dropped some lugs, and it got to Vargas, and he invited the advancement project here.
And that's the one that was in Buffalo that worked?
Yeah, they were the ones that helped us to figure out the solutions, because they helped things change out in Denver by building in these matrices, etc., in order to start changing the climate within our schools. So right now, as a matter of fact, today, Eamon, who is the young man I was talking about, who's one of the co-chairs, and Jim met with the school district this morning. They have been gathering data and getting data from the district so that they can put out a community report on their own. And what they're looking for is the raw data. We don't want the context, thank you very much, that is couched by the district. We want the raw data that we can analyze that data and put it into a report format in order to present that to the community and start winning the hearts and minds of the community in terms of we need a change.
I'm sorry, because I set out for one. This is raw data on disciplinary,
suspension, yes.
disciplinary stuff?
Yes,
Okay.
and it's disaggregated disaggregated by different things like race and so on and so forth, so that we can really understand what the problem is in the Rochester area in terms of where that's at and where we need to go. So we actually need to see that data. So the SED has some data, but the data, remind you, you ask any Board of Education member or any teacher, people don't trust the data that is there.
Right, it's my impression that
Yes.
it's all wildly inconsistent in what one principal or AP's definition of a suspendable offense is radically different than the other one, which is why you have some buildings that seem to be reasonably orderly and other ones that have pretty severe problems in them.
Absolutely, and we agree with you 100%. And therefore, what we're looking for, rather than absolute data, is patterns that will show what's going on. So that's my disclaimer, and the fact is that we're really looking for stories of children who have been suspended for, did you get suspended for dropping a pencil, or did you get suspended for bringing a gun? Very different things. If you're bringing a gun to school, I kind of want you out of the school, I'm sorry. But if you dropped a pencil and it's because you had a reputation and so on and so forth, I think, there's some real fine lines here. And what do? What kind of progressive discipline are we using with our children? Is it a one-time offense? Is it that this kid obviously is showing some real problems in the classroom, etc.? So that's one of the things we're focusing on, and I'll just finish up and then I'll take questions, I promise.
Yeah, I got a lot.
I'm sure you do. The other thing that oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
I'll try to do better in terms of acronyms. So the other thing that we've been, like right now with this lawsuit that you read about in the DNC, that the charter schools, I think that on Monday we're having a meeting, and I think that what we're going to do is set up an editorial board meeting in order to help reframe things from the charter school movement back to the reality of CFE. So the Wall Street Journal pointed out things.
CFE?
CFE, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. Sorry, it was the landmark case that I talked about in the beginning.
Right, okay.
So I'll call that CFE from now on because it'll slip out anyway. This Wall Street Journal really pointed out certain things, like they said in Buffalo, and they also used Rochester example, but I think they focused in on Buffalo, and they said something about there's like 50-something, and don't quote me on the number, I don't remember it just came out yesterday, charter schools, and 43 of them are failing schools. you know, it was a large number, and they're talking about funding being the problem, and I'm going, hasn't that been our mantra for so long? Is that, why do we have two separate systems?
Yeah,
rather-
now are some of these for-profit?
Unbelievable.
At the end.
Till the red rock.
I'm sorry?
Are some of these charters for-profit schools?
Maybe you can.
Charter schools, the way that I think of charter schools are still public schools without the that are
What he means
Okay.
is there are some
Profit
for-profit
schools.
charter school
Okay.
operators,
I-
common in other states.
I see.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
common it is in
In
New
New York
York.
State, it's not that common in New York.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I wouldn't have known
Okay.
how to answer that. I didn't know that there
Yeah.
were actual for-profit, which scares me
Yeah.
even more
Yeah,
at this
right.
point.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
I'm sorry,
um,
Rosemary, I have to break in. I didn't read- I'm so sorry, but it'll go and then it won't come back up.
okay.
And I know I'm doing the same thing to you because you know we're like this. Okay? But did it say anything in the article about the fact that these charters are taking money out of the public school system, sending the students back but not sending the money back?
Yeah, this is, I think that it was mostly brought up, not in the article itself, but that is the truth. Public schools are, the money comes down from the state, the majority of the pie of the money comes from the state into the public schools and goes in the front door and right back out the back door and gets siphoned into the charter schools. The one hope that I have is that we were able to, the Alliance for Quality Education was really fighting this stuff in Albany, and last year, I think we might have set a little bit of a precedent. And you were with us, Lori, when actually the increase in funding that went to charter school for the first time ever went directly from the state to charter schools, which kind of is a good thing because it set up a real precedent. If not, we would have a real problem differentiating our legislators, and I'm not sure if that's going to happen again, but let's say a legislator says, hey, of course I believe in funding for public schools. Yes, I want money for public schools. He could be saying to charter schools, and yes, I want money for you, so it'll come to the public schools and right out the back door, and there he has a foot in both camps, and we wouldn't know exactly who was with us in terms of public schools or not. So I'm really concerned, and I really want to watch that, particularly in how our legislators play up in terms, because this is a legislative battle in terms of the funding for education. It's a huge legislative battle. So we're working on the suspension issue, getting this data report, getting stories, etc. We want to work on the funding issues. And then, of course, I think we did a really good job in discrediting Campbell Brown and her lawsuit, saying that teachers do not need their protections. I think we did a really dynamite job at the press conference, and we did a social media campaign across New York State. We were in New York City like you wouldn't believe. And I think these are bogus lawsuits.
Absolutely.
And this one,
Right,
the
what
charter
was that
schools is
lawsuit?
Just
the one you
it's
just talked
the
about.
tenure, it's the
Against teacher
anti-tenure
teacher
law.
tenure.
Yeah.
It was,
Anti-tenure lawsuit.
Yeah, it was a woman from CNN by the name of, she had a show on CNN by the name of Campbell Brown, who was being funded by some pretty right-wing folks to basically do what California did. In California, they actually found teacher tenure to be unconstitutional, and that is actually under appeal right now.
No, they're going to win the appeal. It's ridiculous. The claims
It's
are
really,
ridiculous.
what she said is what really got to me. She was saying that our children are not getting a sound basic education because of teacher protections, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes.
So that was the whole
No, it's
thing.
How do you spell the Campbell part?
It's like Campbell soup.
No, it's not, it
3MPBE.
doesn't, one does not follow the other.
No, they have nothing. And besides that, they're trying to capitalize on the idea that teachers that tenure for teachers is a lifetime appointment when it's not. That's tenure for a professor in a college. It's not tenure for teachers. So they're playing off of people's ignorance and having people believe that a teacher just is for life.
We should all have such protection. We
Could
should
you
all.
differentiate that?
So,
A teacher,
Okay.
once a teacher has taught for 3 years, their
Right.
administrator says that they're competent and they receive tenure.
Right.
Which means now they just cannot be fired for no reason. Before that 3-year period, that teacher can be fired,
Right.
just told to go.
Yeah.
After that 3-year period, there has to be a
A reason,
process.
right,
Okay?
Due process.
That's, that due
Yeah.
process, that's all tenure guarantees is due process.
yeah.
What's to fight
okay.
about?
I don't know.
What's the lawsuit about? Nothing.
So right now, we need help.
Thank you.
So if you know any
Okay.
parents, what I'm really asking for here, if you don't mind me asking, John, is what I'm asking for people to do is if they have stories on children who have been suspended and that whole process. I mean, you take a kid out of school for X number of days for, they get more behind. There was a study in Texas by Judith Kay. Judith Kay has initiated some commissions, et cetera, across the state of New York that show that if you're suspended once, you're X likely to drop out and wind up in prison. But if you're suspended a few times, you're 7 times, and I don't remember the exact number, 7 times more likely to go to prison, which is pretty amazing. And we really do need to, if we can make our schools safe and conducive to learning and promote public schools that way, I think we can really beat the heck out of the charter school movement and everything, and the privatization that's happening, if we can really provide safe and learning environments. And that's my spiel.
Rosemary, SED,
State Education Department.
okay, thanks. And
You're
also this equity, this is that every school district would, or depending on the number of schools, would get an equal amount of money from the state? Or, yeah, what is that?
They would not. So actually, as you know, it takes a lot more money to teach children who are in poverty, who have
Right.
English as a second language,
Right.
who have special education
Absolutely,
needs.
yeah.
But what was happening was that some of our wealthiest districts who did not have these problems
Right,
were getting more money per student than some of our really high-need districts. And rural districts, so it was urban communities and rural communities that were really suffering. So the rural communities, you wouldn't believe how badly some of them have it when they're considering eliminating kindergarten because it's not state mandated so that they can save their schools. That happened in Olean County. There's a lot of places in some rural areas that are really just by the skin of their teeth are hanging on. They really are. So what the way that the money was being done in
Yeah.
terms of these formulas, so they create formulas, well, here's the big pot of money, now how are we going to distribute it was the
Okay.
big question. And usually what happened was the wealthy districts of Long Island, with all of the votes and everything that happened, would get a real nice piece of change.
so in other words, more per student. That's what you're,
More per student, but more per student where it was not needed.
right, but,
So,
Based on influence, not based on.
based on influence
Not
rather
need.
than need.
okay.
So it was based on.
So in
zip
other
code.
words,
Yeah.
it's worse, it's more worser. Than,
Exactly.
in other words, if everybody would get per student an equal amount. This is way over.
Yeah, and I don't want an equal amount. Because,
No, because-
right, I want an equitable
Yeah,
amount.
because students
Right,
in high-need districts need,
more.
yeah.
right. You got it, you got
Yeah.
it, that's
And
great.
so, what's the
So we did.
move on that?
So we did, when we did the campaign for fiscal equity, we did put through a formula on how to do this. There were, and believe me, that one is a little bit over my head in terms of the formulas and how
Yeah,
they did it, but there was an actually streamlined formula that allowed more money to go to high needs districts, which is great. The problem is that the money is not coming in, and all of that has gone to hell in a handbasket, excuse my expression, after the recession and after Governor Cuomo took over. He put tax caps, so now you've got areas that are, some areas where they're being squeezed on both the tax caps for the taxes, and also squeezed because the governor said, no more state aid, I'll only put a 2% cap on state aid. That means we will only grow by 2%. Every year, a district's amount of money that they spend, let's say a district, I don't know, just for easy sake, right? Let's say the Rochester City School District spends $100 this year. Next year, they're going to have a 6% increase in terms of how much they spend. But he's only putting a 2% increase on everything, so our districts are going further and further and further behind. Any of the resources that they had, that rainy day stuff, a lot of districts have used that a long time ago. So we're not just talking Rochester, we're talking across the state.
In other words, they'll spend $106,
Right.
but they'll only get $102.
Right, so they're already starting to go into a deficit that way.
Okay, now, with that, with suburban districts who can afford more, I mean, how does that work then?
They're hit with it, they're hit with it.
Oh, they're hit with it
They're
too.
what?
They're hit with it too. If you
Yes.
just look at suburban
Right.
districts,
No, but
their budgets, they've
What-
been slowly invading reserve
The
funds.
community, the community comes together and decides.
Oh, I know, and they, take a revote or whatever.
Exactly, where
But-
you might want to go.
But I mean,
But
like,
he made a really good point,
Yeah.
is that they're in the you made a really good and valid point, whereas some years ago, you had districts, Brighton was one district who always said, who very much supported throughout the campaign for fiscal equity lawsuit, supported Rochester and said, we are getting more than enough. You need to fund the Rochester City School District more. There were people on their board like Roncelli and others who really were with us in that and realized the disparities that were happening. But then the reality is that things have gotten so bad at this point, we are even further behind that even some of the, because I don't want districts who are doing well, whether in Pittsford or Victor, I don't care where they are, to do worse.
right.
I just want, if they're doing really well, I want them to stay doing well. What we're finding is that these districts are really feeling pinches as well. They are dropping, I'm sure you heard the story about the Geneseo student who was the valedictorian and couldn't get into the college, of his choice or whatever the case may be because some of the courses were taken away. So you see it in small ways, and it's getting to be heavier and heavier. So all of our districts are feeling a crisis. Sorry.
I mean,
Okay, we've got to
You got this guy.
move on. Thank you very much, Rosemary, that was
welcome.
great, and
thank you.
we'll have a video of your presentation if you want to use it
Share it.
wherever, share it.